Welcome to FailFocus, the series where we unpack real scenarios from Part 3 tests or standards checks, and we ask, why did this fail? And what should have been done differently? Today's session feels like a success on the surface. A PDI, Callum, sits beside a pupil, Ruby, driving competently, she's cruising, it feels good. We're on a scenic country road for nearly the full 45 minutes. There's no drama, there's no danger, it's just smooth, steady driving. So why did the examiner fail him? The answer, simply put, is that while it was a nice drive, it wasn't a lesson. Let's break it down. As you guys know, we take real case studies from real ADIs or PDIs who've unfortunately had an unsuccessful Part 3 or standards check test. We take a look at what happened, we try and dissect what could have been done differently, and hopefully produce videos that will help not only the individual in question, but everybody else along the way. I'm going to start this video by saying thank you very much for watching. Please like the video. If you've got any comments, any questions, any thoughts, I always read the comments and I do my very best to respond to every single one. Share the video as much as possible so that we can help as many people as we can. And most importantly, please subscribe to the channel. This is a new channel where we try and help as many ADIs and PDIs as we can. We're going to be putting out a lot of content, not just FailFocus videos, but they're very helpful and we get a lot of good feedback from them. So please subscribe for more. So we always start with the PDI's thoughts and comments, their feedback. Then we'll have a look at what the examiner had to say. We'll take a look at the scores and where we've really lost points. And I'll try and offer some insight into what could have been different to hopefully push this exact test over that pass line. So here's what Callum had to say in his own words. Callum said that he chose country roads because this was an area that he and Ruby hadn't worked on for quite a long time. He said that Ruby was a very capable driver and overall she has great control, she responds to signs, she's good with her mirror, signal, maneuver, procedure, and Callum thought that this would be a good chance to expose her to something that she hasn't done for quite a while. He said she did really well, her speed control was great, and she seemed confident the whole time. Callum said that he didn't have to intervene once. He said she was doing so well that there was not really much for him to do, and so he tried to ask a couple of questions here and there about how she felt or what she saw coming up. But mostly, he just let her drive because that felt like the most appropriate thing to do. Callum said that he'd been watching the FailFocus videos and that he felt that her ability to cope in the environment was evidence that he didn't need to support her. In fact, if he did so, he may very well be over-instructing. So Callum, let me start by saying I'm really pleased that you're thinking about the appropriate level of instruction for your pupil, and I'm glad that my videos have helped you think about that aspect of your lessons. We're going to go through the examiner's feedback as well, just to paint the whole picture, so we've got two sides of the story. Here's what the examiner had to say. The examiner started by saying that this was a really pleasant drive, it was a very nice drive to be a part of. There were no real safety concerns, the pupil demonstrated a competent level of driving, handled the country roads throughout. However, there was no real clear reason for having selected this topic to focus on the Part 3 test. Examiner said that he couldn't see any clear evidence for choosing this area of development, i.e. country roads. Overall, there was no evidence that this was the appropriate lesson for this pupil to be focusing on based on the fact that no learning needed to take place. She already had all of the skills necessary. Examiner said furthermore, the pupil clearly did not need instructional support and none was provided because it was clear that this was not what the pupil needed to be working on. Examiner said that the lesson lacked structure, clear goals, and an overall vision. This just felt like a drive in the countryside. A lesson has to have a need and a vision to correct that need. Examiner finished by saying, you must justify your lesson content based on the pupil's current needs and have an ability to show development. So let's summarize that, Callum. What the examiner is saying is that you need to build a Part 3 lesson based on your pupil's current shown needs. You said yourself that this lesson was so comfortable, you felt like you could just sit back and let her do her thing. If she has that level of ability, then she does not have a learning need, at least in the environment you exposed her to. That's where we've gone wrong. I love that you're thinking about over and under instructing, but we have to find that balance. It's like a seesaw. You are trying to find a balance between challenging the pupil, but not overwhelming them. Okay, if it's too easy, then we're not challenging them, we're not stretching them, and we don't need to do anything. So we need to justify our existence in the car. It can't be too easy, otherwise you're just sitting back and we're just going for a drive. And it can't be too hard, otherwise they're overwhelmed, it gets messy, sometimes it gets dangerous, and learning isn't taking place. In fact, if it's too easy or too challenging, learning is not taking place. That is why the examiner has unfortunately concluded the way they have. This lesson proved no ability to develop further, improve on learning needs, manage risk, and show that you're building a lesson around your pupils' current shown needs. Now, Callum, I know that you received a score that you felt reflected harshly, given the comfortable nature of how this lesson went. I've taken a look at the scores that you received, and I'm going to share with everybody else some of the competencies that we scored poorly on. That is a 1 or less. And then I'll try to explain why the examiner has concluded that score is necessary. Did the trainer identify the pupil's learning goals and needs? We got a 1 here. The reason we've got a 1 here is because the entire lesson was the wrong lesson. It did not expose the pupil to an environment or a subject or a focus that challenged. It was so comfortable and so easy, the examiner has had to conclude that we have failed to identify the pupil's learning goals and needs. That's why you scored a 1. I think some PDIs think that this is referring to when something grand has gone wrong and the PDI hasn't dealt with it. But it also refers to, quite simply, just identifying incorrect learning needs from the offset. Next competency we got a 1 or less on. Was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? The whole structure of this lesson was inappropriate. It was not challenging enough. It was too easy. Now this you can lose points on this competency because the lesson being too difficult as well as too easy, and in your case it just wasn't challenging enough. That's why the examiners had to conclude the way they have. Was the lesson plan adapted when appropriate to help the pupil work towards their learning goals? I suspect you possibly know this by this point in the video, Callum, but an examiner will have watched the first 5 or 10 minutes and quickly have expected something to change. This is going way too easily, it's way too comfortable, no learning is taking place, and you as a trainer are showing to be unable to justify your existence in the car. We have to be able to justify our existence in the car for that period of that Part 3 test. If you are unable to do that, it's either because your fundamental ability to teach is not where it should be, or the lesson is not right. Was the trainer aware of surroundings and the pupil's actions? We got a low score here, and the reason for that is some PDIs think, well, you know, I was watching what my pupil did, and we didn't nearly hit anything, so how can I have a low score on this? An examiner is going to be looking at that thinking far more broadly. They're going to be looking at that thinking, we've turned up with a lesson that's blatantly inappropriate for the pupil. It's way too easy. And you're doing nothing about that. So how can I conclude anything other than you have shown an inability to be aware of your surroundings and the pupil's actions? Because if you were suitably aware of all of those factors, you should be identifying that this session is nowhere near challenging enough. And so that's just a number of the competencies that we've lost points on, Callum. And I hope that on reflection, you're able to see that as PDIs or ADIs on a standards check, we need to be able to showcase our ability to transfer knowledge, to manage risk, to find that balance between challenging but not overwhelming. And too much one way or the other is equally problematic. How can the examiner conclude that you're able to demonstrate those 17 competencies when the lesson is so easy that you might as well not be there? So please, anybody watching this video, be careful. Don't fall into the trap of, well, they drove well, so I must have done well. There is not necessarily a correlation between those two things. So what could a pass have looked like? As you know, if you watched this channel before, I always try to put a little section in these videos about what a pass could have looked like within the environment that we've been exposed to for the Part 3 test or the standards check. I'm going to be really honest, Callum, and say it's a little bit more difficult for me to do that here because fundamentally it seems very apparent that this lesson was not the appropriate lesson. And so I'm going to say that if it was as easy as it sounds like it's been for the pupil, then it's probably the case that they don't have a learning need for country roads. Maybe there's some things that we could have done to give yourself a better fighting chance. The first thing I would recommend is you've got to make sure that this is actually an area that the pupil needs to develop. So it might be that your pupil should have been working on something entirely different that would have stretched them just a bit more. But let's stick with the country roads for the sake of this video. What are things that we could have done that would have given you more of a fighting chance, Callum? I want you to reflect on what you consider a country roads lesson to be, okay? This is commonly misunderstood. A lot of people will tell me, I'm going to do country roads, and then what they proceed to do is put their pupil on a bunch of country roads, and we drive along country roads, and they call that a country roads lesson. And I take issue with that. Specifically, what is it you're trying to do? It's not good enough to just say, I'm going to put my pupil on a country road and I'm going to call it a country road lesson. The same way you wouldn't just put your pupil on a roundabout and call it a roundabout lesson. Or the same way you wouldn't just put your pupil on a slip road and call it a slip roads lesson. We all know that there's far more to it than that. We need to develop core fundamental skills in order to be able to cope with the slip road, with the roundabout, and the country roads. So what exactly is it that you think a country roads lesson looks like? What are the differing characteristics of a country road compared to other types of roads? Okay, so if your pupil has always lived in a city or a built-up area, how is that different to country roads? What are the different conditions that they could be exposed to? What are the different hazards? What are more and less common in country roads when compared to a city? So we need to understand the differences, first of all, and we also need to get a sense of what is it that I'm actually trying to achieve from this lesson on country roads. What would a good lesson look like? So we got to be specific, yeah? What's the aim of the session? What is it that we're trying to pass on to our pupil from the start and the end of the lesson? What's the purpose of country roads? Why is this the lesson? What have you seen in your pupil's driving that gives you a reason to believe that they have a learning need on country roads? Ultimately, what are we trying to achieve, Callum? What is the actual... It's not enough to just say country roads. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I talk about teaching skills, not subjects. So it's not really about the country roads. The country roads is just giving you a specific environment to exploit certain learning needs so that you can work on those skills. So what are the skills that you're trying to develop? So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Where I live, there's a lot of country roads at the local test centre. And those country roads have 40-mile-an-hour limits on them. Some of them have national speed limits on them. But I know that large chunks of those national speed limit roads, you could quite comfortably do 50 to 60 miles an hour. In fact, you should do, because the environment permits it. The roads are wide and long and straight. So you should do kind of 50, 60 miles an hour. But then there are parts of that same area where you take one turn and it wouldn't be safe or appropriate to do any more than 20. In fact, it would be dangerous and inappropriate to do any more than 20. But those two of those same roads have the same speed limits. So what are we working on here? I'm trying to develop my pupil's ability to look at any given road and make a sound decision as to what is the appropriate speed for this environment right now. It's not just about the national speed limit sign. Yes, I need them aware of it, but the bigger question here is, can my pupil tell me when it's appropriate to get up to speed and do the national speed limit and when it's not? And when it's not, what is the appropriate speed limit for this road and why? How have you come to that decision? So I will spend big chunks of lessons working on that one single skill in itself. I'll expose my pupil to a whole bunch of country roads environments where I know that the whole thing is going to be perhaps national speed limit. But there will be snippets where you would only go up to 30 miles an hour. Any more would be inappropriate. Then 10 seconds down the road, you could do 60. And then we take one turn and you wouldn't possibly do any more than 20, because the roads become very narrow and windy and there's potholes everywhere and there's a ford and there's other things going on. So when I'm teaching country roads, I'm not teaching country roads. In this case, I'm teaching my pupils' ability to take in information in environments that they're not typically exposed to so often, because they normally live in a city, and then make sound judgment calls as to what the appropriate speed is. That is the vision. Country roads just exposes us to an environment where I can exploit that. So that's just one example of how I'm going to utilize country roads and build a clear vision. It sounds to me, Callum, like we didn't really have a clear vision, and that's what the examiner said in their own feedback. Why country roads? Exactly what is it you're trying to achieve? And maybe, Callum, just maybe, there are certain aspects of your pupil's driving that could do with development, and country roads would expose your pupil to those necessary environments. But it sounds like we didn't have a clear enough vision of what the needs were, and you didn't have a clear enough sense of what the pupil needed to be working on, and so you didn't expose the pupil to those required environments. So what is it you're trying to work on when you go country roads? Let's get specific, Callum. Is it the variation in what speed is appropriate at any given moment? Okay, is that what you wanted to be working on? Was it the fact that country roads are a totally different environment to an inner city environment? We've got sometimes more potholes. Sometimes there's less drainage, so we have more flooding. Sometimes we have things like a ford. Sometimes we have more narrow spaces. We've got windy roads, blind bends. We've got farm animals. We've got tractors. We've got pedestrians walking on the road. What is it that you're trying to actually develop when you say that your pupil needs to work on country roads? Specifically, Callum, let's get specific. The other thing that you could or should have been doing in this case, Callum, is there's always varying levels of difficulty with any subject, isn't there? So if I say I'm going to work on roundabouts, that could be mini roundabouts, that could be kind of your standard size roundabouts, that could be complex spiral roundabouts with 5 exits and 4 lanes. There's always varying degrees of complexity. Meeting traffic. Meeting traffic can be one parked vehicle on a straight, clear road, and there's the prospect of another car coming and somebody's got to pull in. Or it could be those long, arduous roads that are narrow and there's terraced houses the whole way up and there's parked vehicles on both sides of the road the whole way up, and there is only room for one car, and we got cats running out from underneath cars, we've got doors opening, we've got poor visibility, we've got junctions kind of at every so often between the terraced housing, and we've got 2 flows of traffic. There's always a degree of challenge, and you have that as well with country roads. So it might have been that you genuinely have identified that your pupil needs some work on country roads, but maybe you didn't expose them to the right level of difficulty. What do I mean? Well, where I am, we've got those country roads that I've already talked about, where it's a long, straight, wide road with great visibility and the sun's shining and there's nothing to really worry about, and all we have to do is drive at an appropriately high speed and we'll be good. But then there's those really tight, windy, narrow roads with potholes on the corner and a little pool of a flood where there's no drainage, and the greenery is overgrown and it's hanging into the road. And then there's the possibility of going even one step further and making it even more difficult, and that might be things like a single track road where there is quite literally only space for one vehicle to pass, and we've got occasional passing points on either side of the road. Maybe what you needed to do was expose your pupil to a more intense version of country roads. Maybe if you'd taken Ruby to an area where it's a single track road and we know that this is a 2-way road and we're having to use those passing places to work around other road users, that might have been sufficiently challenging. And it certainly would have called on some fundamental skills. When you've got windy roads with blind bends and there's only room for one vehicle and you're having to rely on where these passing points are, suddenly you're going to have to develop with your pupil very quickly how aware they are of their environment. So they're aware of where the passing points are on either side of the road. They're going to have to remember where the last passing point is, trying to scope out where the next one is. They're going to have to make plans for what they would do if something came around the corner now. How are they going to position? So it's the anticipation, it's the planning, it's the awareness, and it's the car control that is necessary when we're working around those tight spaces and having to pull in so much but not too much. And do you know what I mean? That level of difficulty, I can't say I've never met Ruby, but that might have been sufficiently challenging. That might have allowed you to really expose Ruby to an environment on country roads that really worked on some core skills and allowed you to showcase some of your teaching as well. So I hope that that gives you some sense of what we could have been doing to improve the state of this session, Callum. And I hope that that gives you an idea of why it hasn't gone to plan, even though the session itself felt very manageable. In summary, Callum's session felt safe, it felt pleasant, it was even successful on the surface. But in the examiner's eyes, it lacked purpose, it lacked structure, it lacked a real vision of what was needed and how we were going to achieve it. To avoid this kind of a fail, you need to make sure that you only choose a topic to focus on when there's a clear, specific need. We should define what the learning focus is specifically going to be, but understand it's about the skills relevant to that situation that we care about. We need to make sure that we find a balance between challenging but not overwhelming. Too much either way is going to be ineffective and learning will not take place. So, as always, I hope that that is helpful to you. Thank you so much for watching. If you're a PDI or an ADI and you need help identifying your pupils' real learning goals and needs, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, put any comments, thoughts, or questions in the comments section. I will read them and I will respond, and share this video so that we can help as many people as we can. One last thing, as I always say, we've got resources that can help you for free, like our PDI exclusive Facebook group. That's Lou's PDI Group. I'm going to put a link in the description. And we've also got some exclusive advanced content available to anyone who feels like they need it. We've got content for ADIs who feel like they need extra support. We've got content for PDIs. We've got content for somebody who's starting right at the beginning of their ADI journey. Or we've got content for people who've started the journey but feel like they need a top-up. I will leave a link in the description. I hope that this has been helpful to you. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to helping you in the next video.